And now for something completely different.
Taking notes like
we had a great morning session talking about academic research in these areas. And I think academic research is great for getting a broad view of what's happening. I, as an academic, like academic research. But I think there's also some value in understanding what's happening with actual companies and what they're really doing outside of the academic towers. We got a great panel today. We have 3 guests here, starting in alphabetical order. Teddy Bekele is from Land of Lakes. Before that, I think you've been there about 10 years. Before that with Ingersoll Rand, I believe. And then before that, mechanical engineer at NC State.
Yeah.
There's going to be an NC State theme and an engineering theme coming up. Next, Sonia Gotapati at Estée Lauder. She's been there for 5 or 6 years now. Before that, NBC Universal. Before that, AT&T. I shouldn't have started this because I'm going to mess up some of her vast history, but also an engineering graduate of NC State. And then our non-engineer, Joanne Stonier at MasterCard. Very interesting and very different background in design and financial services and accounting and law and lots of ands in here. So we've got a lot of background from a variety of different companies. And what thing's interesting is we have a digital product, financial services. We have a retail physical product. And we have what I'm going to label a knowledge product. And that we could fight about that labeling, but we'll start there. As I'm talking, feel free to get your questions in order. We're going to have questions from you too. Let's start. Joanne, how is all this AI we've been talking about going to alter jobs? How many jobs actually have been lost at MasterCard due to AI?
You like the loaded questions. So the answer is none yet. But I think like many organizations, AI has impacted us. So I think that's the real question. So how has AI impacted the organization? So first of all, and it was interesting to listen this morning. I brought up a ton of notes because I was taking notes. Plus I brought up my phone because I have notes from other conferences. I was sitting in the audience and referencing, I got to hear Jeff Hinton speak earlier this summer. And I think so much of what I have to say will kind of, I don't know, I was thinking about lots of different things as I was listening to some of the other speakers. So MasterCard has not lost any jobs, but I think what we do has been impacted by AI for quite some time. Pre-generative AI as well as now with generative AI. So I do think that there's a distinction. Many of you know MasterCard is a financial services company. You have probably one of our products in your wallet or on your phone or know those digits by heart when you key them in to purchase a product, and I thank you with my whole heart for that. But we use data every day to prevent fraud, fight cybercrime around the globe. And we're behind the scenes facilitating payments in over 210 countries around the globe. And by the time I've finished a sentence or two, we've processed over 2 million transactions. And we process for over 20 million merchants. So if you get the idea that we're really large and we have lots of data. And if I pick up that thread, so we've been using AI in our fraud and cyber products for years, in our econometric analyses that we provide to our banks, to our merchants, and to governments, as well as for our data for social impact work that we work with governments and other civil society organizations to understand how data can be used to understand markets, to understand how investments can be made, to actually increase the kind of social fabric across the globe. So all of that means we have a lot of data scientists. We have a lot of people that understand data. And if I pick up on the thread from the last panel, we have an awful lot of people then that are very, very data literate, right? But I don't think that my company is one that's going to put our data out on ChatGPT, and I don't think any of you want me to. Just saying. How many of you would really like me to put your MasterCard card charges and your card number out on ChatGPT? Maybe not. And so the challenge for us is how do we reskill, and like many of them, I bet my fellow panelists, what has happened is using ChatGPT and using LLMs, we have started doing an awful lot internally, right? So there's a what I think many data people will call, we use a defensive methodologies first, customer service, coding, internal activities in legal, HR, to use these models on internal activities, think of the expense side of a P&L, to improve efficiencies in the firm. That was kind of first where we've been using this. And so those jobs have been impacted. Our lawyers, our financial people, our software engineers, our customer service. We've also done extensions of product lines. So how can we take static reports that we were providing our customers and extend so that they can do queries and interact more? I suspect you're going to hear that from everybody sitting next to me. So extensions are next. And then there's the net new that I think everybody was waiting for industry, especially last year. Every CEO had a little bit of FOMO, every board, fear of missing out. That's what's new and next. And I think that's a lot of R&D that's going on right now. But I think there was a real learning cycle of trying to get all of our employees comfortable using Copilot, using some of these tools to reimagine their jobs and get rid of some of the baseline repetitive tasks. So I know it's a long answer, but it really is changing work and changing the tools of work in organizations to get people comfortable with what's going on. And we've told everybody to really hang out with their kids more because the kids are really, really the ones who are teaching their parents how to use the science.
Yeah, there's a great Pew study that came out that shows it's inversely correlated with age, in case you're curious. But that's a purely digital product. You know, there's...
Yep.
It couldn't be true in physical products, could it?
Oh, wait till you hear what they're doing.
Yeah.
It's really cool.
Okay, tell us.
So just to give a little bit background, I think most of you know Estée Lauder brands, but we actually have more than Estée Lauder, you know, brands like MAC and Clinique and De La Mer. So we are in the prestige beauty group. So we have about 25 brands, and each brand has a whole bunch of products. So when we are looking at number of items, we're talking about 30,000 SKUs, if you know what a SKU is. So that brings a lot of complexity and you know, the management across it and the data that comes with it. So so when I look at AI, you know, I think of it as it's really a force multiplier to the human intelligence as well as productivity, right? It really, when you combine human intelligence with the power of AI, it just gives exponential benefits to our company, our consumers, so on and so forth. So when we look at AI use cases, we primarily categorize them into three buckets. The number one is product matching, for example, which we have been actually using for the past 4 or 5 years in the area of how we match our products to consumers, such as when you choose a lipstick, how does it virtually look on you, virtual try on, or what should be your skin care regimen based on your skin tone and condition and all of that stuff. And similarly, how do you match fragrances based on personal preferences, emotion, connecting the emotion to it, etc. So that's a big area where we have traditionally used our traditional AI, machine learning algorithms, you know, computer vision, so on and so forth. But in the past a couple of years, we kicked into high gear, especially with the advent of ChatGPT and LLMs, etc. The second category is in the creative space. Since we have so many brands and so many products, you know, creative team is large, and they're always busy coming up with the new visuals for our products. So there is a large use of quite a bit of use of AI, you know, like a DALL-E or you know, ChatGPT, etc., for creating images, creating videos, and auto-generating the text so that it becomes much, much faster for us to market a particular product. So that's one big area where we are deploying these capabilities. And the third area is really more about knowledge and insight generation, probably very similar to what you have alluded to before. And this is across the organizations, right? Whether it be, you know, supply chain or legal or you know, finance or you name it. We are doing quite a bit of work in that knowledge and insight generation, applying analytics, LLMs, and the ChatGPT models to identify insights, for example, identify the consumer, trends and what they're liking, what they're not liking, understanding the sentiment, and synthesize that analysis and feed it back to our either product creation or new way of marketing a product or repackaging or some of the things that we need to do to connect with our consumers and marketing our products. That's one area. Also, I think speaking of like jobs and how it's impacting, et cetera, how this is all translating into is, like Joanne said, this is really evolving the job definition or redefining the job definition as opposed to really eliminating it, at least at this moment in time, or at least for the near foreseeable future. So, for example, in our company, we have a lot of people working on producing reports, basically insight generation using traditional tools, taking it, that involves a lot of work, meaning like you combine different data sources, you apply queries and, build a UI and then eventually actually make sense of the report and the data that you're looking at. And then you send it to the management and they say, oh, how about this? And then you go back and redo some of this. It's a very involved, cumbersome process. Now with the current AI models, we are shifting our paradigm to talk to your data. That's really you have the data, in the cloud, right? And of course, we are trying to move towards mesh network, data mesh architecture, et cetera, so that all the data is connected and easily accessible, single source of truth, all of that. And then, just talk to your data. Today I can sit there and say, hey, where are my, how are my inventory levels? Which product is running low? Or, so-and-so, ingredient supplier is behind on this ingredient. So how is that going to affect my production planning for next year, production scheduling for next week or next month? So those kinds of things you could just sit there and ask. That's really where we're going. And I think that unleashes enormous productivity gains for all of us. And it also creates a lot of job satisfaction because now, the team members, the employees feel like they're producing value-added tasks and, providing real insights that actually matter to the company as opposed to just, building reports or something like that. I think it's an exciting time for employee base because they're also upskilling their skills during this process. Everybody is sort of moving along for the journey.
There's like 74 things I want to go deeper on about that. I'm just going to parenthetically note that she said traditional AI. How are we in 2024 already talking about something that we're labeling traditional AI?
We needed a phrase once Gen AI came along. So.
But certainly none of that's happening in farming, right?
No. Would you call it a knowledge business?
Knowledge business.
Knowledge, yeah. How much knowledge is in butter? A lot.
A lot.
Just kidding. So we'll get to a little bit of Land O'Lakes. I mean, there's a dairy business, which we'll talk about in a little bit later, through some of the questions. There's an animal feed business called Purina, which we manufacture. So Purina, most people know Purina, not dog and cat, that's Nestle. Mm-hmm. But every other animal species you can think of, that's Land O'Lakes. But the largest business is a crop input distributor. So we buy seed, crop protection, and plant nutrition products from basic manufacturers like Bayer, Syngenta, BASF, and then work through our cooperative members, which are ag retailers, would then sell these products to row crop farmers. So through that, we touch almost 50% of the harvested acres. So what Sam is referring to as far as a knowledge business, what we do most of the time, yes, it's a wholesale distributor. So there's a physical product, all these seeds and the crop protection chemistry that goes to the farms. But what do you apply where and when? So every field is different. Every soil type is different. Seed varieties, there's hundreds that come out every single year for each type of crop. So like whether it's corn, soybeans, wheat, lentils, and everything else you can think of. So matching the right seed to the right field, and because we can predict weather, which we cannot, that was kind of it's hyper-local weather is really hard to predict for a season. Like what is the right application at what time, right? And so farmers are faced with this decision every single day. So farming has been more of an art over the last couple of centuries. Just recently, we're making it more a little bit of a science, and this is where AI, traditional AI or practical AI, has really helped us over the last decade, is really matching that information. And as far as the job itself, one of the critical characters in this whole system is this individual called an agronomist. So this is the person that helps the farmers make these decisions. Farmers make some 180 some decisions every year, and a lot of them are on the fly. But when it comes to agronomic decision, as far as what seed and what soil, under what conditions, what should I do when this pest shows up, or what if this disease is going on, what should I be doing, this is the individual they usually call. And this individual usually has a wealth of knowledge, is local, knows the fields, knows the area, knows the products really well, has been trained on it. And so that's the individual that we rely on quite a bit and have for the last 3 decades to be able to impart knowledge over to these farmers and help them make decisions every single day. And these decisions are not necessarily, they're not like, oh, like there's a bad decision means you might lose the farm this coming year. And a good decision is like, okay, well, maybe we'll be sustainable again for another crop year to come. So that's where we've applied a lot of AI to help this agronomist. So instead of even artificial intelligence, I really like to call it augmented intelligence, because they have a lot of knowledge themselves, but their knowledge is around how to apply some of the basic stuff. So I'll give you an example. So we have this thing called a crop protection guide. It's this book that's 1,000 pages long, and it's got every single thing you need to know about crop protection, right? Like what disease, what pest, which chemistry works well in combination with what's the rate, how much of it, under what wind conditions, all those types of things kind of play into it. So this is something that they study and they learn, but how can you imagine a person sitting there on the fly when they're looking at a disease in a given condition to say, yep, this is what you should do, which by the way, they did for years, right? So even that was an art in itself. This is where things like AI, before we were inputting data into kind of a model, and then it would say like, this is what you should recommend. Again, it's not black and white. They would look at that and they still make a modification to it because they're like, well, yeah, that's what the book says, but in this situation, we should apply this differently. So with Gen AI, that's an example where now you can, instead of having to type it in, you can speak to it. What it could also do is take, the weather conditions at that moment in time, depending on where you're standing. So whether it's pressure, temperature, what potential moisture coming into the air, and say, this is my best recommendation. And what's exciting with Gen AI is actually this agronomist can actually have a conversation with the model and say, kind of go back and forth till they formulate what the right recommendation might be, and then have really that rich conversation with the farmer, or even email them or text them the recommendation of what they should be doing. So that's where I think actually it's more exciting than it has been before, because in agriculture, we're starving for more insights, more data, more how to take that art and turn it more into science. So AI has been really exciting to see that come through.
So Teddy called it practical AI at some point in there. I guess the contrast would be impractical AI.
Impractical AI, yeah.
The 1,000-page book reminds me of something that you were saying to me earlier last month about the number of regulations and the number of countries that you're working in. And I don't know, you tell the story better than I can, I'm sure. Like, you have to deal with a whole lot of information.
That's right. So when we produce our products, there are many different things we consider. Of course, there is the consumer sentiment, whether they like it and all of that. That's art by itself, right? And then come to regulation, because we operate in 150 plus markets or countries. And because of that, we got to account for things like ingredients. For example, when we ship a product, you can only take hyaluronic acid as an example. They only allow million, I'm just making it up, million ounces in a year to that country, which means you got to keep track of how much hyaluronic acid is there in every bottle that you ship to this country over a period of time. So you got to really keep track of it. And these things keep changing. And certain ingredients are not allowed in certain countries. Thereby, now you got to change the product formula for that particular country, which means it's almost like a different product you're making. So a lot of these things you got to keep track of. And then, of course, these days with privacy and the regulations, that is another aspect of it when we apply digital tools, and also when we do the consumer
Preferences.
yeah, front desk or at the
Preferences
beauty
at the
advisor
counter,
level.
right, at the
Yeah,
counter.
if you want to offer a personalized service, then you got to get a lot of personal data from the consumer, and how you treat that data, it also varies from country to country, which means the applications that you have available have to be different versions in different countries, which puts a huge burden on the companies.
That's a huge combinatoric explosion if you just do the math between the number of products and the number of places. When we were talking about things to talk about in the panel, Joanne yelled at me, and she didn't like the word automation. She liked the word altering much better, about how things are going to alter jobs.
Because I don't know that all of AI is going to automate. I think that AI is going to alter things, right? I think automation is its own science in and of itself. So robotics, et cetera. So, go ahead.
So alteration is good. How exactly are you preparing? If you said 0 jobs have been lost, that doesn't mean the jobs haven't changed in this process.
Correct.
So how are
I
you
think you're hearing how, right, you're hearing how jobs are changing at Land O'Lakes, right? And I think you can hear it in financial services. Financial services is one of the industries that is predicted to have some of the largest job change, right? And I think you can do it for any number of industries, right? You were trying to do an abbreviated version of my resume, right? I started out my career as an auditor, right? As a technology auditor. And so when you think about baby auditors used to do tick marks, anybody? Right, anybody in mind? No? Okay, you don't know what those are? It's all the better, you don't need to, right? And so the job training for an auditor or a junior lawyer, right, was repetitive skills, right? You would bring in large numbers of undergraduates, right, who come out of school or law school and teach them how to do document review if you're a lawyer. All of those tasks now can be done by AI and generative AI. So in my field in financial services, we're seeing the equivalent of the seed example, and I think also the equivalent of the regulatory example, whereby I think sales is going to be different for every sales team now, where there's a complicated product mix, right, for customers. That's going to make it much easier to match to a customer the right product, as well as tailor products for the right customer at the same time, right? Rather than trying to have a salesperson understand hundreds of products, tools are going to be able to navigate that landscape in a way that's going to then cut down on the time and energy that it used to take think of insurance, right? How complicated insurance products can be, how complicated financial advisors can have it, tax auditors, right? All of those type of skill sets where there was a ton of memorization and you could know only partial things really well. The tools are now being created to understand things like compliance, anti-money laundering, all in financial services. All of those things are going to change. And so it means what for you as an employee, right? It means a lot for you as the recipient, as the customer. You're going to have amazing customer service. So I think all of us are going to benefit. And I think that was the very first speaker's point, that we're going to be in part of a revolution as customers where our service levels are going to go up, our product choices are going to go up, our personalization is going to go up. But as employees, our jobs are going to change, right? And how we deploy them and the number of people that are going to be necessary to do that sales delivery is likely to change. So what does that mean? It means that you have to learn how to use those tools. You have to be comfortable with the new tools, the new screenings. Does mean that if you're a salesperson that concentrated, and I'll pick on insurance, on one type of insurance, you may now have to understand many more products using a tool to screen them, right? So it may mean you have to do more using a tool to understand it, which again is a different way of actually delivering things, right? That's the shift, I think, that we all, as humans, have to get used to with this magnificent tool that's going to help all of us in whatever your specialty and skill set is. That's the shift, I think, that's coming.
Okay.
Can I add
Yeah,
to that?
sure.
Because that brings up sales is a fascinating area for me because there's a lot of changes there. And you're absolutely right. Even as all consumers, we know that, what I can find online and read about a product or something, if the salesperson is just saying that back to me, there's no need for that individual, right? I mean, that specific part of the job will go away. But in our area, I'll give you an interesting one talk about the dairy business. So there, we buy the milk from dairy producers, and then we turn that into butter, cheese, and then put it into the grocery stores, right? So cheese specifically, we have like two sides. One is more of retail, so what you'd find in a store, and then the other one is what we call food service, which is more to restaurant operators. So in the past, sales meant, okay, we got to go sell this cheese or cheese sauce to restaurants. And there's thousands of restaurant operators across this country. So which ones do you call? Well, the ones that have chains and that are bigger, right? That's the idea. And then you would go beat your head against the wall. But even then, sometimes you have to start with the local store. So these brokers that really help us get our products into these restaurants, you know, they had a marginal, like somewhere in the 10% hit rate whoever they talked to. Well, we started to apply this model back in 2019, where we took the menus of the restaurants, the different restaurants, and also the customers the type of customers, create a persona for the type of customers that would attend those restaurants, and then match up our product to what would fit well onto that menu, and then go back to the broker and said, these are the restaurants you should go talk to, which is great. Like, I mean, their hit rate went drastically high, back in the 60th percentile, right? But what ends up happening is the good ones stopped really being sales and become more like advisors to the restaurants, because now you're like getting in there and starting to talk about like, hey, I have this cheese product, look in this bag, taste it, it's great. They're starting to talk about recipes. Here's how you can modify your recipe. Here's how you can make new items. You know, that because they know the more of that conversation they have, the sort of their conversion gets much higher. So it's really interesting how their job, how it's really.
I would never, like, I'm an idiot. I never would have thought of that. But once you say it, it seems obvious. Yeah, look at the menu.
But that's the shift, I think, that everybody has to make, that your job is no longer what it was. It's what is the value add play now, right, that you're going to bring to the position, rather than the repetitive task moment that you were having, which was which restaurant's going to buy the cheese. It's how, right, does cheese fit into the restaurant's business, right? It's a different flip of the switch, right? And that, I think, is what individuals have to get used to as they adopt the tool into their business. It's like one of the former speakers said, well, creativity is safe. And you mentioned that I have a design degree, and I teach at Pratt. I teach in their design management program, which is for folks who have a creative undergraduate degree who want to get into business. And I can tell you right now that architects are using AI tools. Why? Because it gives creatives a whole bunch of ability to look at many, many more options than they could have looked at before. They used to have to build physical models. They had to do their own drawings. Now they have the ability for a tool to give them 15 different options for a client. They can narrow it down using their own kind of knowledge of, well, will this floor plan work? Is this really buildable? How high can this go? Is this really what a client will like? Is it aesthetically pleasing? It may be creative, but it may not be aesthetically pleasing. Those things are happening right now. And one of the props I brought was an article from the New York Times. Anybody see the article about the guy who wrote a beach novel? No? Anybody read? Oh, wow. Okay. How many people? Really?
Reading is a newspaper, it's a printed piece of paper.
I copy of it, so I have it. But it was, who wrote the better beach read, me or ChatGPT? And so it was an end of summer kind of article. So anybody read beach reads? And both he and the ChatGPT wrote two little novelettes about kind of, and they used the same prompts. And I read it without knowing which one was which. And it was pretty clear once I read both of them which one was ChatGPT. It was a little flatter. It wasn't as interesting. It was a little bit more mundane. You could tell that the science is still behind us, thank God. But it was interesting, the end of the article, the author talked about how much work they had done to make sure GPT couldn't beat them. And it was all about the research that they did, that all of the background work that they did, that they changed things in anticipation. They had other people read, like they did a pre kind of story before they started so that they had something already done. But I also thought it was interesting that the character development was better. There was a whole bunch of things that if you're an author and you have all of this experience, right, it should be better. It should be richer than what the machine spits out. But the difference was ChatGPT did it in 17 seconds. And that's going to be the difference, folks, right? So for him or her, the author, what I would say to all of us is that that is the difference, right? If we wanted to be prepared for the panel, we could have asked GPT to do this panel for us. It may not have been
It doesn't look as good as I look.
I'm not kidding, right? It may not have been as good, but it would be a baseline of information that's available, and we didn't talk about data yet, right? It would be a baseline of whatever information is available. And the question is the information available? Is it rhetoric? Is it really rich? Is it good? It will pick up what's there. And so I thought this was really interesting and thought-provoking, so I highly recommend reading it.
So maybe a way to switch this back to corporate, though. Actually, my slides are prettier now that I have these tools. But you know, if you think about 17 seconds to mediocre, but this author was able to extend that and go beyond that. And I'm guessing that they were able to extend and go beyond based on a history of writing, based on their experience in writing. It's not clear to me that our students have that experience now if they're getting to that 17-second mediocre, how we get beyond that. What role do corporations have to helping improve how people use these tools?
So I think, previous speakers talked a lot about Copilot and GitHub Copilot, et cetera, right? The statistic is about 1 million plus developers are already using GitHub Copilot to write the code.
Yep.
But is that the complete code? Did they just create the entire application? No, they didn't. They probably took the pieces of the code and got it from GitHub Copilot.
And it was prompted by something.
Right, with some prompt, but that's just a piece of the puzzle. It's the human still has to complete the puzzle and deliver the end product. I think that's where the difference is. I think when you apply to corporate America, it is the same thing. When you create applications or a particular use cases, pieces can come from these tools, but then it's the human intelligence that is ultimately needed to make sense of it. Like I said before, we use these tools in the creative process quite a bit, but do we actually put them out there as they are? No, absolutely not.
But what are you doing to help your people use these tools better?
So we actually started that journey quite well early last year. So we have an AI Academy that we have established, so where we have a lot of our courses, classes, the training programs for employees, and then we put them as, for some of them where applicable, we actually make them as part of their developmental goals every year. Similarly, we have deployed Copilot on all our laptops. So people can actually use them on daily basis. Of course, it is still protected behind the firewall kind of a thing. You can't really go outside with it. But at least it gives the exposure to all the employees, not just technical employees, but everybody. So they can, do basic functions, whether it be search or create a memo or whatever that may be. The other thing that we're also doing is AI ideathons, kind of like a hackathons, but more focusing on the idea. So competition for the entire employee base to come up with ideas that are based on, powered by AI. So we have been conducting those once every, 6 months or so. And then, that also kind of encourages employees to learn and pick up new skills. And yeah, those are some of the things that we're doing.
Yeah, I agree. We're kind of doing similar things, but I think it's really hard to elevate or change the mindset of the workforce in general, right? Because one of the things as a technologist that I'm not able to do is to tell them, because a lot of them want, well, how should I use this in my job? I don't know. You know your job. I don't know your job as well as you do. So the key is to teach them how to reinvent their own work.
That sounds hard.
Right? And so we're trying to, not that we call it prompt engineering, but how to do prompts. Because most people, when they first look at Copilot or ChatGPT, they look at it as a Google search bar, and they're just asking questions. And then they look at the result, or write me a novel, and they're like, I could do better than that. Actually, I have an executive, one time said, hey, I want to do this. I'm like, yeah, you should use Copilot or ChatGPT to do this. And he used it, and then it was like, nah, I could do better than that. And then dismissed it, right? And I'm like, well, no, that's you got to continue to work with it. Shape it to what you want it to be. Even put something in that's in your own voice and then ask it to do more. And so that has to be taught. And so we're trying, right? We're trying to do more engineering, like giving them some exercise and show them just to kind of to see if it sparks. But it'll take some time. One thing, ironically, that's working is we do have Copilot deployed, but we don't have as many licenses as we have knowledge workers. So if you don't use it, you lose it. So you can ask for it. We'll give you the license. We'll monitor for 3 months. If your adoption is low, we'll reclaim the license and give it to somebody else. It's not because we don't want them to use it. It's just to create a little bit of that. Hey man, like if I don't use this, I'm not gonna get access to it. And so that's helping some, but we still got ways to go because once they kind of understand how to work with it, then I think they can start to really.
Well, what you're also touching on is even though there may be zero job change in aggregate, there may be a lot of job change within that. There may be a lot of pluses and minuses here. And perhaps that plus and minus works in different countries. I think Carl mentioned translation is something that might end up being something that promotes a switch between countries. Are you seeing any differences in the locations of jobs in developed countries, non-developed countries? Is any mix change?
Not yet. I was going to just add on to kind of the education point that we also, there's programs that we're bringing in-house from organizations like MIT, and then we also have professional courses that we send people out to. So there's like a mix of how we're doing things just to expose different employee groups to different types of education. But we haven't seen kind of the shift yet because we're so global that we offer a lot of trainings to our employees.
You may have been already all over the place.
All over the place, yeah.
Actually, we've got a few more minutes here. Think about your questions that you might have. Do people here? I see already a couple of hands. I will shut up then.
Yes, hello. Great. I don't know how should I start, but I do have a brain. And this is a little background. I grew up in a developing country. For most part of my life, more than half, I live here in the developed country. So my brain is always arguing, I don't know the left or the right or the top or the bottom, always arguing between developed world and developing world. So that's where my question goes. Knowing that your two companies are pretty much globalized everywhere, I know you're based, US based, but however, when I go and travel a lot throughout the US, still I feel like I'm in the developing country anyway. So the question goes, how you transmit the message of AI to the developing world? Because from the developing perspective, AI is a huge monster, and it's going to come and eat us, at any time. But being in the developed world, it's not so much about it. Still, very vague. We're still trying to figure out, how to deal with it. Still very vague, and it's a lot of lack of policies and ethical issues and so on. So, yes, your views about, how you transmit the message properly, and no one glove fits all.
Yeah, we're speaking here kind of from a state of being pretty inundated with AI left and right, kind of overwhelming, but the whole world is not like that.
So I really appreciate your question because I had a call this morning. So I'm part of a project with the World Economic Forum on data equity. And one of the challenges we have with AI, period, is that the data that it consumes right now, generative AI, is from the developed world. Because that's the data that's on the internet for the most part. And so we have a real slant of the data and the outputs from generative AI that they reflect mostly the westernized world, predominantly the United States. It also has a slant toward the western part of our country. It has a slant toward men, not women. It has a slant toward white men, not men of color. And so it doesn't necessarily represent the whole world. It's getting better because we recognize these flat sides, we recognize what we call bias in the data and therefore the outputs. And so the outcome of AI and generative AI, and this is also true for traditional AI, as we deploy these tools, we have to recognize what outcomes are we driving toward, and is the data and the inputs and the algorithms and the processes that we are using this tool for, is it really fit for the purpose for which we're using it? And so you're right, to a certain extent, that we as people who are deploying this, right, as companies, both those who are designing the foundation models and the LLMs, those organizations that are consuming them, right? So there are the creators as well as the consumers of these models. We have to recognize that it is still a ways away before they are perfect for the whole world. So that's number one. I don't think they're going to consume the developing world in the same way that I think that there is unevenness in the developed world. I think that there is still a lot of mystery to this. We are in a, who said it first today, a privileged room to begin with, right? That we are right now a group of people that have been exposed to this science, and yet we are a limited piece of the population of the globe that understand what these models do, what their power is, and their power to change things. But I also think that lots of organizations are very committed to trying to make sure that this time we actually keep in mind all corners of the globe as we try to design products and solutions so that we don't further tech debt or gaps in the world. And I know my company is one of them. And so we're trying to design this time with more equitable outcomes and inclusive outcomes than maybe we did the first time around when the internet was deployed. But it's a great question when we still know that some parts of our globe don't even have working water, electricity, and that we're working on a cellular network for the most part, not more than that. But I do think that people are aware of the challenge. At least that's our view at MasterCard.
I agree 100%, and I think the idea of localization and using local data to power these models is super critical, but there is an advantage in that. So there's a good hope in there as well, which you can leapfrog
Yes.
a lot of what what's called a developed country had to go through. An example I'll give you in farming, so through our international venture, which is a nonprofit, we try to, because we're a cooperative, we try to set up other cooperatives, other places, and get them to get to the same spot. And like soil sampling is one of the things you have to do is soil sample to understand the profile of the soil, so then you can match it up with what needs to happen from a fertility standpoint and what products work well and what grows well with that soil. That was developed here. I mean, now it's in models and it's easy, but before it was like, there's really expensive soil labs that were put together, lots of thousands and millions of samples that had to go through there to sort of break down the different soil types and figure out the composition. So now in a developing country, there's smallholder farmers, but you don't have to send your soil to a lab that has to get established. You can say, can we understand, are the soil characteristics the same? If that's the case, let's build from there. Now, there's still more data that's required, but at least it's giving you, it's going to give a little bit of a leg up and a little bit of acceleration compared to what had to happen here over like the last 100 years, right? So,
yeah, I think the bias in these models is wonderful, and not that I'm pro-bias. Don't take that as your takeaway point, but we can do something about it now in a way that we never could do something about that at scale. All right, other questions? Sorry.
Yeah, I have a question in terms of you as firms who consume AI and purchase products from, say, like whether it's computing power, data services, licenses. Do you feel as consumers that these markets at the moment are very agglomerated, and that perhaps that's a problem in terms of where you purchase it from, whether they are monopolized in a way that constrains your decisions? I'm an economist, so we think a lot about agglomeration and potentially like monopolies in this market in particular.
Are we getting obliterated by the tech giants? Go.
That's right.
Can you actually elaborate that a little bit?
Well, in terms of, you need cloud services. I don't know how many companies are out there who can provide cloud services at good costs that make it feasible for you to implement what you need. If there is 2 versus if there is 100 companies, obviously the kind of prices that you would get would be different.
The
so
massive scale economies that exist in this are creating a hegemony of technology companies.
There is a little bit of that happening. I totally agree with that because, each of us go with one of the largest cloud service providers, whether it be Microsoft or Google or Amazon, AWS, et cetera, right? And each of these companies are promoting their own version of Copilot, ChatGPT, Bard, et cetera. And because we have embedded infrastructure with one company and their AI models are built into it, and thereby you're kind of stuck with it. I mean, maybe it's not a bad thing. I'm not judging one way or the other, but you do lose that freedom because it does provide a huge economic advantage as well as as a user, it's I'm on Teams and it's so much easier when Copilot is integrated into it as opposed to going somewhere else and calling a different application. Yes, that it is definitely forcing us into not duopoly but quadropoly or whatever, right? Like that kind of a scenario. Absolutely.
I don't know the solution, right, to your question, in that the size and scale of these large language models and what it takes to run them, to create them. We saw early days, we saw Bloomberg try to create one, right? Who has the data, who has the compute, who has the capacity, right? I think are all issues that are among the challenges, right? There are other issues that we're not going to talk about today around the power consumption, the water consumption. I know that that there was some ideas that, quantum's going to save us, but we have other issues when we get to quantum, right? And so these are some of the challenges of this science at this moment that I think there's a reason why there's only so many providers at this time.
And also, this is my personal view, right? This whole thing exploded just about less than 2 years ago. So it's very nascent and in very beginning stages where innovation is happening at lightning speed and the people who have the deep pockets are doing that innovation. But I do think once it kind of stabilizes and we reach a point where I think there will be new entrants to the market and probably regulation will, jump in and make some accommodations for independent applications to be developed that are, don't have to be tied to this. I do think that it will change in, 3 years, 4 years, whatever that may be,
I do think you're going to see hybrid models created by companies like ours that are up here with some of these larger companies, but where the whole market goes, if I knew that, right.
Well, yeah, and another piece I'd add though is GPT itself has been worked on for 10, 12 years, right? Maybe even longer. But it's till ChatGPT came out in November of 2022 that all of a sudden it's in everybody's hands and everybody's oh my God, we can do lots of stuff with AI. So the question is going to be, is that in itself enabling innovation because AI is in the hands of many? And are there now companies that will develop something similar or use that itself to be able to develop something very novel? So you got that going as well. So you got a little bit of that trying to figure that out. I thought where you're going with your question, which is one that I think is something we'll have to deal with, is a lot of these cloud providers are enabling these AI models, and you need these large data centers that consume lots of energy.
Yeah.
Water, electricity. Do we have enough of that going forward? And I care about it particularly because I work with a cooperative that deals with farmers. And water is 70% of what, agriculture uses 70% of all fresh water available. So is this going to be a tug of war now between ag and the AI itself? And then, are we going to get into a spot where a farmer has to make a decision of do I just give out my water credits or instead of farming? There's all sorts of things like that we'll have to figure out how to solve going forward because it is energy intensive to run these models.
Yeah, back to the history and putting it in historical context. The Sabre Airlines had the terminals on everyone's desk in the 1980s, and shockingly, they offered American airline tickets. You got to think that's going to happen with the technology companies with economic incentives to recommend their products. I think we got time for one more question.
Talk to each other, see if you can come up.
Fight it out.
Hi, thank you so much for being here. So I'm a career coach here at McDonough, Georgetown. I work with students who are outside of these companies and wanting to get inside the companies. It's been a constricted market over the last couple of years for hiring, and I know hiring trends are often looking towards the future. So what advice do you have for students, many of whom are in the room, as they're contemplating what skills do they need to be part of the new workforce that you're looking to hire?
Wonderful.
Great question.
Wonderful. What do they
Wants to
need?
start? I can get started, and then so I think one thing is sort of embracing this technology, whether it's generative AI or the next iterations of it that come forward, is really learning how to use it, right? Like if you can come in prepared to be able to use this technology. I'll give an example. My daughter is an HR professional, right? So just joined the workforce recently. One of the big pushes, although I don't know if she listens, is learn how to use like ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini or all three, because you want to go to the job where you're as a recruiter, you want to be able to use these tools to find the right candidate. You're not just going to put all the resumes into a model and be like, give me the best one. Like you're going to have to ask a whole bunch of questions and figure out that candidate that really stands out, as an example, right? How do you make sure that there's no bias in what the model is doing? Can you identify that in itself? So I'm like, if you can learn like to do those types of things, like, you're going to be well prepared for what's coming. Now, the other question is, with me in academia, I know Sam is, are we starting to embrace on how we teach using these models in classrooms? So it's not like, like you're trying to cheat on the test or trying to do the assignment, but like how can you actually really learn to use this to do your job day in and day out, or the homework or the assignment and whatnot? And I think that's going to be, that's what I would say, is embrace it, learn as much of it as possible, become almost an expert, because you are getting a leg up, right? You almost have like kind of building on top of the giant's shoulder, like you already have that, so you can go beyond that, and that's really how you would excel.
As long as it's the leg up and not a crutch. I think that's
right.
what we've got to figure that part out.
Right. Yep.
All right, I think we're at lunch here. I'm sorry, we're
I just was gonna-
one more. Wrap us up.
One quick point on that. I think that the idea is, yes, everybody should use the AI tools, but the idea is being data curious, okay? All of this is built on data, and I think people are data phobic. They hear data, they hear math, and so I know that, I don't want to do that. And there's so many different careers that are built now on data analytics, including HR, law. There's an aspect to what our entire world is driven on now is digital. And so if you can get your students to understand that they have to be able to be analytical and querying and have the ability to cut through what is also true and what is false. We didn't talk about kind of all of the challenges, right, of deep fakes and everything else. They're going to find deep fake jobs being offered to them, right? And they're going to need to have the ability to understand what is real and what is fake, right? And do the analysis. And whether it's an HR job, right, of understanding what's true and what's not true on a resume, right? How are you judging a candidate? What's the criteria? So to begin to make more data and analytic driven decisions and be able to come up with rubric for those kinds of decisions. I don't know that we teach that as a skill set or in any one class, but if we can put that into curriculums across the board, I think that's going to help students as they transition into corporations where that's going to be part of almost every job. I hope that helps.
Yeah, to the general point, I think it will be every job. In 1974, Robert Piercer wrote a book about Zen and the art of motorcycle maintenance. You need to know how your motorcycle works, and I think that's pervasive across the message here. I think there's some important issues about natural monopolies coming up as well. We got a lot to grapple with, but like they said, we're just 500-ish days into this new model world.
Right.
I think lunch is in the back there, and we'll reconvene, I believe, at 1:45.
Yes. We have an hour and 15 minutes for lunch, so please actively network with everybody in the audience. Very exciting. We're going to break for lunch, and then when we come back, that leading question that we had there, the next question is, what's happening in the future? So we look forward to seeing you in an hour and 15 minutes. Thank you very much.